phenomenon of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism as a defining feature of jihadism, Muslim Brotherhood as the sort of the foundational organization for modern jihadism. So I'll have some abstract analysis and some very, very concrete examples of how that plays out. In order to understand how an organization like the Brotherhood comes into being entails also understanding how anti-Semitism comes into being. The two are connected, although anti-Semitism is much older than the Brotherhood. One thing that drives it, both anti-Semitism and the rise of the Brotherhood, is a deep longing for purity or goodness and light. It's a longing to see the firm ground under your feet, to know with certainty what the truth is, so that you don't have to grope your way in the dark. It's a longing for fixed formulas and ready answers. We've all seen this in our students. You raise a question, but what's the answer? What's the answer? What's the answer? Okay. This is as old as Thales, the first philosopher in the Western tradition, who was walking along one night, fell into a pit, climbed out of the pit, and said, "Never again will I take a step without being certain of the firm ground under my feet." It has to be perfect and pure. Syllogism provides certainty, and certainty is tied to knowing the path. Knowing the path is essential to maintaining one's purity. It's also essential to one's redemption. So the anti-Semitism that you see in the case of, I would say, the Nazis and the Brotherhood as well, is a redemptive, it has been called redemptive anti-Semitism. Hating the Jew, I saved my soul, from the standpoint of the Brotherhood. Now, if purity is what I'm longing for, and think of the Nazis' term, Judenrein. At the Wannsee Conference, when the Heydrich had, and Eichmann and the others had the table of Jewish populations by country, there were a couple of regions that were Judenrein, purified of the Jews. Not just the Jews eliminated, but the region has been purified. The Jew, as I mentioned yesterday, is the contagion, is the contamination, and even as far back as the Hellenistic times, when Hellenistic and Hebraic modes of thinking and understanding the world collided, the Hellenist thinkers were looking for perfection, certainty, knowledge, and the Hebraic thinkers kind of mess things up with questioning. It's messy. Some of you perhaps have studied Talmud. It's messy. You open the daf, the page, you got the Mishnah, okay, Mishnah, then you get to the Gemara, and it's all over the place. And sometimes you go on and on with the question, and finally it's, we can't figure this out, Eliyahu will have to give us the answer when he comes, Elijah. Leaving that kind of loose end is anathema to the Hellenistic thinking. It's messy, it's not pure, it's not clean, it's not clear. Now, so the Jew, just by the questioning, the Jew messes things up. It's not just the Jewish question that's a problem, but the Jewish questioning that drives anti-Semitism. And indeed, we have a teaching, Judaism that God is in the question. The El is in the She'elah. So, Rabbi Gamaliel used to begin in the first century his sessions by saying, ask. And he would end by saying, ask further. Go forth and ask further. There's always asking. The asking is more crucial than the answering the question. Even questioning God. And that's where it can really get messy. In Islam, you don't question God. You submit. So, the Jews represent messiness. Now, what happens with the rise of modernity and the shifting of centers from earth to sun, from world to ego, the rise of the age of reason, the undermining of religious institutions, the killing off of the kings, the ones anointed by God, which, as Albert Camus argues, the regicide is a deicide. Really starting with the 18th century, you have the beginning of a reaction to that, that contamination, the contamination of modernity, undermining the holy, the pure, the true, the sacred. In Europe, you see a rise of pietism, parallel to the Age of Reason, Hasidism. I think these movements are they have lots of elements going into them, but one of many is a longing for holiness, goodness, the pure. The tzaddik is incapable of sin. The tzaddik has a connection that none of the rest of us have. And similarly, the Holy One, the Saint, and so on. Now, in the 18th century, we have Wahhabism, 1744, founded by Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab. Wahhabism would prove to be very influential on Hassan al-Banna and his understanding of Islam as a purist movement. Now, there's three main objectives as stated by al-Wahhab in the movement that he initiated. One is to purify Islam of pre-pagan practices. The origin is pristine. The origin of Islam comes with the revelation of what is pure, true, holy, pleasing to God. In any religion, just look at Christianity. Where does Easter come from? It comes from pagan elements, right? The traditions that don't come out of nowhere, and they have, contaminants that remain within them, as al-Wahhab is trying to get rid of that. He's also trying to purge Islam of Muslim scholasticism. What's that? As you know, in the Middle Ages, the Muslim thinkers rediscovered the Greeks. Maimonides read Aristotle in Arabic, not in Greek. Right? Maimonides wrote in Arabic, responding to Avicenna, for example, 11th century Muslim scholastic, 12th century Averroes. Averroes, who had read Maimonides. So you have there's an interesting interaction among the key medieval Jewish and Christian and Muslim thinkers. It's very interesting. But what's the thing that ties their interactions together? Hellenistic thinking in general and Aristotelian thinking in particular as a method. It's more a method than an ideology or a specific point of view. It's a way of approaching the truth. Al-Wahhab sees this as kind of a negative outside influence. Now, of course, in the age of the Enlightenment, 18th century, this influence of reason as the high court of truth is returning. It's the age of reason. It's a source of contamination. Okay. It interferes with the higher relation. It interferes with the faith. You don't need faith to move mountains if you have reason and dynamite. And finally, he wanted to purge Islam of the mystical teachings of the Sufis. Also, the Sufis were Muslim mystics. They're still here. They're still around. But they, you know the book, The Way of the Sufi, by Idris Shah. It's a collection of Sufi tales and teachings. They're all the main Sufis are from the Middle Ages. What's wrong with the Sufis? Well, you find among the tales of the Sufis, the tale of the 7 blind men and the elephant, which probably originates in India.
Oh, the Panchatantra, Sajjata.
Yes. Well, the Sufis picked that up. And you know the story. The 7 blind men are trying to describe an elephant. Each is feeling a different part of the elephant and says an elephant is like a tree, like a wall, like a snake, like a rope. And of course they argue with each other. No, he's not. No. And of course the Sufi's point is that God is the elephant. Each of us has our very narrow vision of God, that God, like a true mystic, God is transcendent, and God is reveals himself to all in his own, according to his own way. Somebody who wants a pure Islam can't tolerate that view, that all ways of approaching God are legitimate. There's only one way. So, also critical here to the emergence of the Brotherhood are the teachings of Ibn Taymiyyah, who was a commentator on the Hanbali school of law. There are a number of schools of law in Islam, but there are 4 main ones that arose in the 8th and 9th centuries. The Maliki school, the Shafi'i school, Hanbali, and Hanafi. What the 4 of them have in common, among other things, is that they all these thinkers legitimize jihad as holy war, based on things like the sword verses in the Quran, the 9th surah. So, the Hanbali school, whenever you read the background of jihadist thinkers and writers, Ibn Taymiyyah is almost always there. The Hanbali school is almost always there. The Hanbali school, and with, I would say coming in second, the Hanafi school, or the Hanbali is the way of thinking that most extensively glorifies the path of jihad, of the 4. Okay. So if you know that, number 1, this desire for purity is what's driving Wahhabism, influenced by Hanbali, jihad. It tells you that you reach purity by any means necessary. You think of Robespierre, French Revolution. What was Robespierre up to? He wasn't, at least he said, he wasn't just eliminating political enemies, he was purifying France. He's going to teach moral virtue with the guillotine. Beware. the ideologues who want to purify the land, the people, the folk, the Ummah, the world. It has to be totalitarian. Totalitarianism has this element of this drive for purification in it as well. Now, another very significant movement and reaction to modernity is Salafism, which the Salaf is someone who comes from the beginning, the original believers, the pure, pristine origin of the way, of the path of Islam. So it's back to the roots, back to the beginnings, back to the origins. These are names that turn up when you study the rise of Salafism in the 19th century. Jamal ad-Din al-Afghani, Muhammad Abdu, and Rashid Rida. Each one has his own outlook, his own agenda, but they're all three in different ways are associated with this rise of movement to purification. Now, also happening at this time, of course, is the British in 1882 go into Egypt. This is bad news for a purist Muslim. It's not just a matter of a foreign power now ruling your land with their laws. It's a matter of contamination, desecration, evil. The British are jahili, right? They're immoral. It's having, it's tantamount to having agents of the devil in your midst. So it's not just a different political system or power structure. It runs much deeper than that. So this is also, I would argue, reacting to that foreign influence that is, right in the midst of it after 1882. The whole world is going that way. It's also, I think, important to note that these are not a bunch of lunatics who come from the rabble or something. These guys are associated with Al-Azhar University, which is probably the most prominent university in the Muslim world.
Muslim Sunni world.
Yeah, in the Sunni world.
Yeah.
Of course, you can't.
No.
We go to Qom in Iran or something. But anyway. Okay. But anyway, Al-Azhar is at the top of the places to study. Maybe next to Oxford, but Al-Azhar. The association with Al-Azhar is very important. Of course, many of the rectors of Al-Azhar have been very anti-Semitic in many of their comments. Now, among those figures that were associated with Salafism, the rise of Salafism, is Rashid Rida, who was, again, a purist, viewed the Western influences as a source of contamination and desecration. He was born in Lebanon, studied in Syria, moved to Egypt, where he had a very substantial influence on Hassan al-Banna. Now, al-Banna, whom you've seen already, was also influenced by Wahhabism, read the Hanbali, law texts, Rashid Rida, hated the British, and in 1928 would establish the Muslim Brotherhood. There's another figure here in the history of these developments that has to be mentioned is Abdul al-Maududi. Maududi was born in Lahore, at the time India, which is now in Pakistan. His aim was to bring to the world what he called true Islam. Now, the longing for purity is longing for truth. If you have a discussion with Marxists, I once got into a little exchange with a Marxist in Buenos Aires. I was giving a talk on genocide. And he said, why don't you just admit that all genocide is perpetrated by capitalists? I said, well, Stalin, Pol Pot, I mentioned a couple of Marxists. He said, those aren't true Marxists. Right? Maududi is interested in true Islam, and not just in true Islam, but in bringing true Islam to the world. He maintained that in doing that, the world has to come under Sharia law. Islam has to be purged of secularism, nationalism, women's emancipation, he maintained. Certainly communism and socialism. Some of his thoughts, teachings, Islam wants the whole earth. If you're after purity, it's got to be the whole thing. It has to be total. The whole earth does not content itself with only a part thereof. It wants and requires the entire inhabited world. You see, this is logical. This totalitarian thinking, given the premise, is perfectly logical. It says we are, of course, opposing the Jews to fulfill the demands of our faith, and not for the sake of the Arabs. Maududi is not an Arab. We're not in it for the Arabs. Arabs, Shmerabs. It's not about the Arabs, from his point of view. The Jewish presence, the problem of the Jewish presence, is a problem posed to the faith, to Islam, to true Islam, and not to the Palestinians or the Arabs in the region. Or it's not an it's not reducible to ethnic political issues. It has this absolute kind of, I would say, metaphysical dimension. Maududi was an admirer of Hitler. Why? Because Hitler knew how to wed politics and ideology, and even spirituality. The Nazis were, if you look at the rites and rituals, for example, of initiation into the SS, it's like a big church service. Have you seen, anybody seen the films of this? The Nazis were not anti-religion. They were anti-Judaism and even Christianity, but they were not non-religious. So another move that Maududi makes that will carry over and its influence on all the other jihadists that came after him, including Al-Banna, is his insistence on the wedding of politics and religion. You can't separate them. You can't have true Islam without power. You can't have power without politics. Right. Now, those who study the history of the Brotherhood break that history down into three sections. Stage of what's called the stage of insurrection, which is the rise of the Brotherhood in 1928 until the 12th of February 1949, when secret agents of King Farouk assassinated Hassan al-Banna and made him a shaheed, a martyr. Stage of ordeal following that. This is the time of the suppression of the Brotherhood in Egypt, particularly after 1952, with the the coup that took over the government, the emergence of Nasser. The stage of ordeal is characterized also by the persecution of Sayyid Qutb, whom I'll speak about shortly, who influenced everyone. He's another one of those who influenced everyone who came after him. And then the stage of differentiation after 1967. What happened in 1967?
Six-Day War.
Six-Day War. That created a theological problem in the Muslim world, among many. That humiliation came from God. So the suppression of the Brotherhood was relaxed at that point by Saddam, and then they started spreading out. They were spreading out from the get-go, but then the spread really took off. And I date the end of this 2011. Most just say 67 to the present. I think after the Arab Spring, you have the beginning of another stage. That's open heart. So, you know about Hassan al-Banna. Founded the Brotherhood in 1928. He and, as I said yesterday, 5 others. They started with 6. It's much bigger now. The creed, I recited the creed, or told you the creed, but this is it, if you want to see it in writing. Now, if you look at the creed, Allah is our goal, the Prophet is our leader, the Quran is our law. So far, so good. Right. You know, pious Muslims say, Allah, I long for my relation to Allah, I want to please Allah. The Prophet Muhammad is the leader or inspiration of the Prophet, the one who received the last revelation. The Quran we're given to live by. Then you get to jihad is our way, and death in the service of Allah is our highest desire. This is the innovation. As I said yesterday, jihad takes on the status of a kind of 6th pillar. And indeed, al-Banna would say that if anyone who doesn't die without fighting, without going on the path of jihad, he says, dies of a jahiliyyah death, an immoral death, a tainted death. The death is not pure. So, this is the meaning, he says, of jihad is our path. But what does it mean to say jihad is our path? al-Banna explains. It means if you don't die fighting, you're out. You have no place with God. This is a distinctively jihadist move. So you have the emblem with the word prepare, Quran and the swords, weapons. That's the path. You've got the law and the path. The teaching and the path. Some of al-Banna's teachings, God has imposed jihad as a religious duty on every Muslim. If you are, God forbid, an invalid, then you can give money to support the jihadist cause. If you're a good mother, as the Hamas charter says, you can't go fight. You raise children to go fight. You tie yourself to jihad in any way you can. It's a duty from which there is neither evasion nor escape. To evade it is one of the 7 mortal sins that guarantees annihilation. This makes not engaging in jihad unthinkable. Since the Quran commands us to love death more than life, victory can come only with the mastery of the art of death. And what is the art? Art of death? What's artful about it? You see, death becomes a task. Now you might say, well, now I would say, in most religious traditions, death is not just a natural phenomenon that overcomes us. It's a moment of testimony in our religious lives, whatever our religious life might be. I mean, a Jew is supposed to die saying the Shema, right? Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, Lord is one. Here, however, the art of death is martyrdom. Is to die in the act of killing. Notice how the very notion of martyrdom or witnessing gets twisted here. It isn't dying by refusing to murder. Kiddush Hashem. Kiddush Hashem, sanctification of the name, martyrdom in Judaism, is required on 3 occasions. One, that you have to die rather than commit adultery. 2, you have to die rather than commit idolatry. And 3, you must die rather than commit murder. Okay. So you see the inversion of thinking here. Now, during this period, this will prove historically later to be quite interesting. Ruhollah Khomeini met Al-Banna in 1937. There were, by the mid-30s, Muslims from various parts of the world, and of course Khomeini is not an Arab. He's Persian, Farsi. There were Muslims from various parts of the Muslim world, Middle East mainly, who went to Egypt. Al-Azhar, was a center for learning. Studied, and there were people in the Brotherhood that a number of them studied with, including the future Ayatollah Khomeini. Now, when he was he was there in the late 30s and 40s. And when he was there in the 30s, he met a young man, or in the 40s, named Abab Safavi, also Iranian. Safavi was the founder of the Fedayeen al-Islam in Iran. You can see the date of his death. He died a martyr, you might say. They would target individuals in the Iranian government. This is pre-revolution, pre-79. And they targeting assassinations. They weren't suicide bombing. The suicide bombing was a later development. So Khomeini and Safavi were tight in the 40s, and Safavi is famous for this statement: "The Almighty Himself taught us how to kill. So shall we not kill when it is necessary for the triumph of the faith?" Killing is tantamount to saying a prayer. When killing is for the faith, it's an expression of your relation to God. It's an affirmation of a higher relation. It's saying something to God. Behold, I am your servant. Watch me kill the non-believer. This is a little disturbing, is it not? Saying a prayer, killing for the sake of the faith. Now, again, notice the just you got to keep. It's like taking a math thing. You got to keep everything that's got before in mind. Attaining purity requires killing. The body, the metaphor of the body. The cancer has to be cut out of the body. The source of contamination has to be eliminated for the sake of the soul. What does the contamination threaten? It threatens my eternal life. I have to kill it. I mentioned the connection between Albana and Husseini yesterday. Husseini, who deepened the connection between the Muslim Brotherhood and the Nazis. The Muslim Brotherhood, as I mentioned yesterday, sent delegations to the Nuremberg rallies. They sent members to participate in the Arab Revolt in 1936. Between 1936 and 1938, their membership went from 800 to 2,000. So during the period of insurrection, it's also a period of the growth in the movement. One of the things that attracted members to the Brotherhood is the revolt against the Jews. Okay? The anti-Semitism, Jew hatred is foundational to the thinking. If the West is a source of contamination, it's because the West has been contaminated by the Jews, controlled by the Jews. The imperial powers of the West can't do anything unless the invisible wire pullers, the Jews, okay. In 1946, the Brotherhood opened its first office in Jerusalem. Within 2 years, in 46 to 48, they had branches in Jordan and Sudan and several others in Palestine. By 1952, they had more than 50 offices in Sudan. So they're spreading out. I mentioned Arafat, who joined the Brotherhood in 1946 under the tutelage of Husseini yesterday. Arafat received military training from the Brotherhood, military training supervised by former Nazis, German military. Literally thousands of Nazi war criminals went to the Middle East. It was one of their destinations. South America was another one. Middle East welcomed Nazi war criminals.
Where did you get the training? In Egypt?
Egypt and Syria. Oh, Arafat got his training in Egypt. Yes. And he was among the members of the Brotherhood who fought in the war in 47, before the outbreak of the War for Independence. This is one of Arafat's comments on homicide bombing in 2001, and this is a Brotherhood inspired, al-Husseini inspired, jihadist inspired view. There was a bombing that took place in Tel Aviv. It said the heroic martyrdom, is, one of their key phrases. The heroic martyrdom operation of the man who turned his body into a bomb is the model of manhood. and sacrifice for the sake of Allah and the homeland. This is what it means to be a human being. It's a model of manhood. I suggested yesterday that a fundamental question for anybody's ideological, religious, philosophical, theological outlook is, what is a human being? What makes a human being, so on. But this is the model of manhood. This is a photo of the Brotherhood Brigade. You know there was fighting in Palestine long before, many months before May 1948. This is before the UN resolution, November 47, calling for a partition. There was fighting ongoing. Hostilities didn't begin on May 15, 1948, the day after the declaration of the Jewish state. And the Brotherhood had their brigade fighting in 1948. Now, 47 and on through. Now we move to the stage of ordeal, which revolves around Sayyid Qutb. Qutb was an aspiring writer in the 30s and 40s, and he actually wrote a fair amount of literary works. He was a member of the Wafd Party, which was an Egyptian nationalist party. He switched to the Sa'adist Party, which is ultra-nationalist, because the Wafd wasn't nationalist enough for him. He studied the writings of the Hanbali jurist Ibn Taymiyyah. Also, I mentioned Ibn Taymiyyah earlier. He became friendly with members of the Brotherhood in the 40s. He went to the United States in 1948 to study education, and first in Colorado and then at Stanford University. When he was in the U.S., he was horrified by the rampant immorality, the jahiliyyah, of such a decadent. Imagine if he were to go to the U.S. now. This is 1948. When you couldn't say damn on the radio. So he's like, reminds me of like when it said when Menachem Begin once made a trip to Las Vegas for a fundraiser. From the airport to the venue, he covered his eyes and said, Babylon, 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 and wouldn't look at anything until he left anyway. Qutb spent 2 years like that, with his covering his eyes and ears, in the horrific land of decadence. And democracy is a form of idolatry in his view. Okay. Of course, this corruption, this filth, comes from the Jews. So when he returned in '51, he became full-fledged member of the Muslim Brotherhood, with whom he had had relations. And he would later describe 1951 as the year of his birth. In 1953, he wrote a long essay called Our Struggle with the Jews. And in that, you have all of the classical, anti-Semitic statements and claims that the Jews are, from the beginning, the Jews have been the enemy of Islam. From the outset. So if the purification of the tradition entails a return to the pristine origins, at the time of the pristine origin, you also have this evil that's opposing it, i.e. the Jews. the tribes, the Banu Nadir, Banu Kunaika, and the Banu Qurayza. Banu Qurayza, which was the tribe, Jewish tribe, wiped out by Muhammad, and the other two were expelled. So, why? I mean, because, the Ayatollah Khomeini brings this up from the beginning. Why? Because the Prophet saw from the very start the source of the danger, the contamination, the evil that threatens Islam. And irredeemable evil. So, some of his teachings. Once again, this is like right out of Maududi, who had a big influence on Qutb. Jihad aims at converting all humans on the entire earth. Of course, that doesn't include the Jews. They're not human. You can't convert them, according to Qutb. But so it's an expansionist militancy which aims at liberating the whole of humankind. There's no enslavement more pernicious and insidious than Western democracy, than license, the freedom to do anything, say anything you want. As Al-Banna said, Islam controls every facet of life, public and private. There's no distinction. Indeed, in any totalitarian system, there is no distinction between public and private. You see that there can be. I remember when I was in graduate school in a galaxy far, far away, long, long ago, studying Russian. And at the time, the Soviet Union still existed. So that's how I'm old. And when we'd have visitors or people, refugees from the Soviet Union, they had the hardest time understanding privacy, what it means, or even how to translate it. There's the word lichny, which is personal, but not exactly private. Right? You know some Russian. So, totalitarianism can't tolerate privacy. Now, the one difference between Soviet totalitarianism and Islamic jihadist totalitarianism, as Al-Banna says, Islam controls every aspect of life in this world and the next. It's so total, it goes into the heavens. Now, just beware, again, of otherworldly traditions. Traditions that put their main accent on the paradise of the next world and not on this world. So that's the liberation comes with the realization that you're only free when Islam controls everything you do, say, think, and feel in this world and the next. The Jews, as Qutb says, are the blackest devil, the source of the worst and anti-Islamic machinations. They're always plotting, not only against humanity, but against Islam. They are the eternal enemy of Islam. They are the evil that plagues humanity, as clearly shown in the protocols. Qutb also invokes the protocols of the Elders of Zion. The battle is eternal. Recall the remark from Muhammad Hussein Yaqub that I mentioned yesterday. Our war with the Jews is eternal, will not end until not a single Jew is left. Qutb maintains that anyone who says jihad is not violent doesn't understand jihad. Islam, he says, is a system for the whole world and is obligated, Muslims are obligated to destroy any obstacle to implementing that system by any means necessary. You see what the implications when you're talking nuclear arms deals. By any means necessary. The Jewish state is the embodiment of the Jewish evil, according to Kutub. So that the jihadist view of the Jews doesn't derive from the reestablishment of the Jewish state. In other words, they don't hate Jews because of Israel, or policies of Israel, or fences, or checkpoints, or settlements. It's the other way around. They hate the Jewish state because of the Jews. I mean, as Yaakov says, if the Jews didn't occupy anything, we would still hate them. It's not about the occupation. And I'll say more about that in a moment. So you have this from Kutub, the Satanizing of the Jews, even more vehemently than Al-Banna. Every jihadist after Kutub studied milestones and our struggle against the Jews. And he wrote he wrote a book on social justice. As I said, he was a literary writer. He was a prolific writer, but the book called Milestones is most influential. All of the Kutubists would read Milestones. Other developments during the time of ordeal. By the way, Kutub was arrested in 1955 under the Nasser regime and released in '64. Arrested again in '65 and hanged in 1966. So, I mean, Nasser, like Mubarak, like Sisi, knew that the Brotherhood was going to pose a serious threat to their power. And indeed, Kutub and others, his ilk, would look at leaders of the Arab world, like Nasser, and denounce them as Zionist agents. Now, if you've ever read the broadcast, the text of the broadcast from Nasser in the 6, 7, 8 months leading up to the Six-Day War, he's not very sympathetic toward Israel. But he's a Zionist agent. Right. He's part of the Jewish conspiracy. Like Al-Sisi. Right? He's an Israeli stooge or something.
So it was this issue against Echazim. Recently, after what happened in 2013, when Sisi is throughout Muslim Brotherhood was power, they said his mother came from Morocco and she was Jewish and he is Zionist working for Israel.
Yes.
And the regime also used the same against them. Said that Hassan al-Banna was born in Morocco and he from a Jewish family and he is Zionist. Most of them use the same.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Yes. But anything that's not with the Islamic jihadist agenda is Zionist. That's the Manichaean good and evil division. Right? Either Zionist, Jewish, or the stooges of the Zionists and the Jews, right? The lackeys of the Zionists and the Jews. Ahmed Yassin, as you recall, was the founder of Hamas. He joined the Muslim Brotherhood during this time of ordeal in 1957. He was, as I mentioned yesterday, in '72, went to Gaza to set up an outpost there for the Brotherhood, and later in December '87, would be the founder of Hamas. Another important figure to hook up with the Brotherhood, well, yeah, first some of Yassin's teachings, which I didn't really put up. Jewish state must disappear from the map. Sons of Islam everywhere, the jihad is a duty to establish the rule of Allah on earth and liberate your countries. This idea of liberation, the truth will set you free. It's a redemptive liberation. It's not, now I'm free to do whatever I want. It's not the freedom that you think you have when you leave the home of your mother and father and get your own place. It's a redemptive freedom. It's salvific. So liberate your countries and yourselves from America's domination and Zionist allies, either victory or martyrdom. Of course, both are paths to salvation. Victory is a path to salvation. Martyrdom is a path to salvation. Another very important figure to align himself with the Brotherhood during these years. He joined the Brotherhood in 1960s. Abdullah Azzam.
Sheikh al-Mujahideen.
Pardon?
Sheikh al-Mujahideen.
Yes. Abdullah Azzam he wrote, one of his main works is Join the Caravan. He was a big influence on Osama bin Laden. He was part of the creation of Al-Qaeda. He had a hand in drafting the Hamas Charter. He was a representative of the Brotherhood in Damascus. He in his writings, he said he lists quite a number of rewards that come to the shaheed, the martyr. With the first drop of the martyr's blood, he says, all the martyr's sins are forgiven. He's purified. Washed in the blood, I guess, of himself. He goes on to marry 72 virgins. Now you might think, well, this is stupid. Who would want to have 72 virgins anyway? What would you do? It's no picnic for the virgins. But it's a metaphor. But much more important than that is that he also has the opportunity to intervene on behalf of 70 of his family members for their redemption. This takes it to another level, doesn't it? He's a messianic figure, at least for his family. You see why the family would build a shrine to their son who martyred himself. You can see why communities would admire him. If you read the Hamas Charter, as I pointed out, it's the duty of a good Muslim mother to raise her children for jihad. If then the children bring redemption to the family, that doesn't look so insane. If you believe it. How do you deter it? Think of it. You're a young guy, or more and more, a young woman. You love your family. You would do anything. You would die for your family. Happily. With thanksgiving. Accent on eternal life, next world, other world. I can bring eternal life to my family. What greater love than this hath a man for another than to give his life? Not just to save your life now. It's not just throwing myself on a hand grenade. save the souls of my family. And when you have a believer, this is a problem. This is very difficult to oppose and to combat. So you see, from the outside, things like the Muslim Brotherhood look absurd and ridiculous and insane. But from the inside, it's not so absurd, ridiculous, and insane. Very intelligent people become part of the movement. So in order to understand it, in a way, I think you have to feel the attraction. Why would somebody with good intentions and above average intelligence be devoted to it? Now, Azam, got around. He has, some of his teachings. Those who believe that Islam can flourish and be victorious without jihad, fighting, and blood, are illusion and do not understand the nature of this religion. Haras Rafiq does not understand the nature of the religion, according to Abdullah Assam. If only the Muslims would apply their Lord's command and implement the laws of their Sharia for just 1 week in Palestine, Palestine would be completely purified again of the Jews. Sharia is about purification. In most religious traditions, purity is a very important thing. We have, in Judaism, we have laws of family purity. One of the 6 orders of the Talmud, Torah, on matters of purity. So it's not, the issue of purity is not alien to human thinking, but the question is, how do you regard it, how do you deal with it, how do you understand it, how do you attain it? Here, instead of a ritual bath for Assam, if there is a ritual bath, it's a blood bath. You see. I will mention, let's see, with this, the end of the Age of Ordeal. I'll pause here. With the war of 1967, let me just reiterate that this was a huge opportunity for the Brotherhood. The humiliation of the Arab armies. This is Allah's punishment. They got the attention of a lot of people. Suddenly, Sayyid Qutb's writings are selling like hotcakes. Protocols of the Elders of Zion, big seller. The jihadist texts are out there, and soon Sadat would let them out of jail. But by the early 70s, big mistake for him. Anyway, maybe for the next 10 or 15 minutes, at this point, I should entertain some questions before the break. Yes?
David, thank you very much. I really appreciate I would say the contrast that you showed between the Jewish culture, which is a culture of questions, and the culture, or maybe the Christian perception of Muslim Brotherhood, which is total submission. Now, when I was listening to your talk, and I heard a lot of quotes, a lot of ideas. What I was missing is maybe the context. Perhaps you can refer to it. And today in Egypt, the average person, Rami, correct me if I'm wrong, lives from about $1 a day. Maybe less. And the question is whether the economic situation contributes to acceptance of such kind of ideas. And that means, and excuse me for being a bit, economical thinker in that case, that if we improve the economic situation, maybe such kind of ideas will be less popular.
That's a very good question. The economic situation provides an opportunity for the promoting and disseminating the ideas. It's a fertile ground for the ideas to grow. The economic situation doesn't create the ideology. The ideology exploits the economic situation, as I see it. The fact that you're poor, it doesn't mean now you're going to be a murderer. But there are lots of poor people who are not murderers and don't want to be murderers. The civil rights movement in the United States, the movement, part of the movement led by Martin Luther King is a good example. Poverty doesn't mean you're going to go out and kill people. It can mean nonviolent resistance. Mahatma Gandhi lived. India is, still a place where poverty is everywhere. So poverty isn't the cause, but poverty can be something to be exploited to promote the cause, the movement, and that's how I would see it here. But you're right. You do have to keep in mind context. You got to keep in mind British occupation. You got to keep in mind the King Farouk and his suppression, Nasser, nationalist movements, the political environment. It has to be kept in mind. The Six-Day War is another context for a shift in the direction of the Brotherhood. So it's a good question, and it has to be addressed. Thank you.
My question would be about the popularity of the Muslim Brotherhood today. I mean, how popular are they? How much influence do they have on the governments of the Muslim world? Are there any political parties which they are linked to? So I would like to assess the significance of the Brotherhood today.
I'll talk about that in the second half today further, but they are present throughout the world. So if presence is popularity, then they're extremely popular. There are many, in fact, most jihadist movements, as I will discuss this a bit later, are traceable in their origins to the Brotherhood, to Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda is traceable to the Brotherhood. Many movements are traceable to Al-Qaeda. The Brotherhood also has organizations that are either very sympathetic to them or actually aligned with them throughout Europe, throughout the UK, North America. Haras was telling me yesterday there are more than 24 in the UK. Groups, yeah, with that affiliation. So I would say that indicates a high level of popularity. The two governments that are most tightly associated with the thinking and teaching of the Brotherhood are Sudan, the Sudanese government, and the Iranian government, which I will talk about after we break. Thank you.
Thank you. Could you talk a little bit about how the Brotherhood views Christianity and where that fits in?
They're kuffars. They're non-believers. They're a threat to the Brotherhood, to Islam, to humanity. They're Bin Laden used to refer to the Jews and the Crusaders. The Crusaders are the Christians. Of course, the Brotherhood is not the first organization or movement to view the Christians as a source of contamination, as evil enemies. That goes back to the beginning, when the Arabs moved into Palestine and took Jerusalem in the 670s. yeah, they had no use for the Christians. Well, I mean, if you read the news, you know about the riots against Christians, slaughter of Christians, ISIS, slaughtering Christians. So this is, yeah, Christians are a problem. But where do the Christians get their contamination from the Jews? The Jews are precede the Christians.
Would you say that the Muslim Brotherhood is a modern organization and movement?
Yes. Certainly in its view of the Jews, yes, I would. Even though they want to go back to, yeah.
In the 2010, Tariq Ramadan was the guest of the French radio and TV, where he promoted the ideas of the Muslim Brotherhood. As a professor, how could you explain the blindness of the French media, French authorities, and French history?
The blindness?
Yes.
Well, there are lots of reasons. In academia, there's a similar blindness, and not just in the media. There's several reasons. One, most people, even most professors, know very little history, as a matter of fact. Which is, as I discovered, I wasn't a history major. I mean, I had degrees in philosophy and comparative lit. But I discovered pretty early on that one of the most important areas you have to study is history, or you can't make sense of anything. Number one. Number two, they're terrified of appearing to be prejudiced or bigoted or intolerant. God forbid, God forbid. So they're very reluctant to stir anything up. When I say they, I'm talking about people in the media and people in the academia as well. In some cases, and I know a person, I know people in this room who know, have either experienced or know of cases, individuals have lost their jobs when they say something. I have friends, I have maybe half a dozen friends who have lost jobs over this and related. Go ahead.
My question is that if we have the sort of facts about anti-Semitic attitudes of Brotherhood and Jewish prejudice, but which factors played important role and determinated role for legitimate Brotherhood party in Egypt? And could you say
what factors played a role in legitimating?
to forward, political forward? Because terrorist groups legitimizing or arriving to power. No, it's illegitimate to know.
Yes. If you are you thinking of 2011 when when Morsi came to power?
Yeah, decline.
Well, I think the economic variable is important. The view of corruption, the same thing that enabled the rise and legitimized the rise of Hamas. That is to say, the political corruption that people could see and that people, were disgusted by and rejected. The Brotherhood provides a pure, cleaner alternative. My guess is that most people in the Arab world don't actually read the text. The leaders do, the ideologues do, the Abdullah Azam read the text. Most people don't read the text, but they hear the discourse, they hear the promise. They know that they see the corruption in their governments. And the Brotherhood said, we will clean up the corruption. We will have, you know, an honest, true path. That draws a lot of people. Now, I think, I would say, I'm open to correction on this, but I would say Morsi was eliminated not so much by a popular movement as by a power struggle at the top.
So, do you know the question, but just to carry on, just a quick comment regarding the last two comments. It's interesting that the first thing that President Obama, well, the elected President Obama did before he was the actual president was give Tariq Ramadan a visa as one of his first actions. And regarding Egypt, the State Department and the American administration played a major role, I think, in being supportive of the Brotherhood during the time of Morsi. Morsi was a professor in California, right, before he goes to Egypt.
Is that true, by the way?
I believe so.
There is a big debate about that.
Okay, well, I believe from California, but we can get into debate. And I think it's also very important as a footnote to look at the 2009 speech where the Brotherhood was invited honored guests, and Mubarak didn't attend the speech. So the 2009, it's on YouTube. I'd recommend watching it. Do you have a final quick point?
Yeah, or maybe in the next session because it's not that quick.
Okay, so next session.
Did the Brotherhood change goals through time or through these changes of heads or sages adding more ideology?
Good question. They didn't change goals, but they changed strategies or tactics. And especially in the 70s and into the 70s with Camp David, that led to a shift in strategies, a discussion of how violent should we be or not. So the ultimate aim is the same. The division within the Brotherhood and the splitting off of other groups comes with how do you get there. So it's more a method of, you know, means than an end. The means shift, but the end remains the same.
What was the turning point of shifting from just being in the Middle East to the whole world? And what was the reason?
Well, they began spreading in other regions of the Middle East in the late 40s and into the 50s, North Africa. As the opportunity arose, the expansion continued. It was always expansionist. The ideology was expansionist. It's an ideology that has to be spread throughout the globe. So whenever there's an opportunity to expand, they would expand. I mean, Al-Qaeda would seek opportunities for expanding, not just to Africa and the Middle East, but to South Asia, Southeast Asia, Philippines, North America, South America, you know, all over the world.
Thank you.
Ulrika, final question.
Thank you for the presentation. I have a question. Would you say that the thinking of the Islamists you represented here are more influenced by the situation in their own countries, or by the experiences in countries where they studied, like say Tub, you said?
Said Qutb studied in Egypt and in the U.S.
Yes.
Well,
the question refers to the thinking of modernity of the Islamists, and my question refers to the discussion if anti-Semitism is an import from the Western societies, or it stems from the experiences of the people they live in countries that changed.
That's a good question. Well, if you read Qutb's text, our struggle with the Jews, he finds many, many, many passages from Quran, from Hadith, to legitimize his anti-Semitism and his view that the Jews are the blackest devil and evil. So, and he argues that from the Prophet Muhammad, we are taught to hate the Jews. It's not just because he went to Stanford and saw sex, drugs, and rock and roll all around himself. It's not just because the British are occupying Egypt, although these are exacerbating circumstances, right? There are circumstances that would lead him to look for long-standing truths and traditions in his religion to understand what's going on. So again, the circumstance doesn't cause the anti-Semitism. The anti-Semitism affects how you are reading the circumstance, as I see it.
So thank you. So we're going to break for tea and reconvene at 11. Thank you.